To you, Ibn. We come to you live once again from the KwaZulu-Natal Rock, the Provincial Results Operations Centre based right here at the Moses Mabhida Stadium in KZN. Over the last couple of months, political parties have crisscrossed the length and breadth of this province on their campaign trails. Now this despite the heightened political temperatures in some parts of this province. These parties will soon find out whether their campaigns have actually worked in their favours. Now the IEC seems to have ironed out some of the issues they had this morning. I spoke to the IEC's Mawethu Mosri earlier about voting day in KZN. This is what he had to say. Listen. Now to discuss some of the issues in KZN in terms of voting day. Mr. Mosri, thank you very much indeed for your time. Let's just get a sense of what's been happening in KwaZulu-Natal in terms of voting.
We have opened all our voting stations. 4,700 plus of our voting stations are all operational. We did have difficulties with just about 100 of them in starting off this morning, and we've resolved all of those issues, and voting is proceeding well throughout the province.
What were some of those issues?
The issues were related to short supply of critical material at voting stations, and we had one voting station where a bizarre type of protest was experienced, where people dug a trench across the road which we were supposed to use. So we were actually delayed because of that incident there.
Okay, so but eventually that station opened up?
All stations are now operational in KZN.
Are you hearing about any other incidents such as this in terms of protests around the province?
The areas that were reported yesterday and on Monday as experiencing community protest are all quiet and stable today. Voting is proceeding very well there. Even in other areas that had posed serious difficulties in the past, it's all quiet, and as you may have seen, Kwamash Hostel is also one of those areas where the process is smooth. So we are very comfortable with all areas that had protest in the province.
We've got 5.1 million registered voters in this province. Is your staff capable and coping with the actual voting?
Well, we registered all the 5.1 million people onto our voters roll. We basically know where they are and how many people we are expecting at each venue. And we've made a provision for 100% of them arriving at the voting stations, and we will be able to take care of them and allow them to vote seamlessly and as quickly as possible.
Mawethu Mosri, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks. IEC's Mawethu Mosri there. Now, with regards to turnout, at 10 this morning, 10% of registered voters voted, and between then and midday, a further 10% voted. Just bear in mind, KZN has 5.1 million registered voters. Remember, final turnout can only be calculated once voting stations close at 9 p.m. tonight. Now, we're getting a lot of visitors here at the IEC Results Operations Centre since this morning. One of them was the first citizen of this province, Premier Senzo Mqunu. I had a chance to speak to him earlier. Take a listen.
It's a very serious problem because we have agreed that the campaigning would end yesterday, but their distribution of the T-shirts in those kind of numbers, even today, that to us is a very serious problem. But I must say that we are quite happy that our members, like we agreed, are going out, and we shall be able to make a difference.
Okay, we'll try to come back to that. We're having a bit of a problem with regards to our audio. Let's bring in now our analyst, Lubna Nadvi. She joins me now. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. Well, just basically, what's your impressions to this stage? We heard about turnout at 10 o'clock at 10%, then another 10% by midday. How are you seeing things develop today?
Well, I think obviously because it's a public holiday, possibly many people are opting to go out and vote later. Those that are still sort of getting to the polls, we'll probably see the numbers increase by the close of the day. So I think you'll probably see a higher turnout by the end of the voting, by 9 o'clock. I think that clearly it's a steady sort of progress throughout the day. Those people that have intended to vote will go and vote, and those that have intended to not, they will. There's this campaign of like not actually participating in the electoral process.
Yeah.
So I think that people have already decided what they're going to do for the day, and so we'll just monitor, and the fuller picture will become clear really by 9 o'clock this evening, I think.
You know, talking about those spoiling ballots, voting for opposition, the Ronnie Castrol's campaign, and the like, many political leaders have slammed it in terms of spoiling the ballots. So what's your impression on that? Do you think the public bought into that?
I think that there has been a significant sort of support of that Sadiqwe campaign, because it reflects really the frustration that voters are feeling with regard to the ruling party in particular. I think that it's really a protest vote against the ANC. And so there are many people who have actually sort of said, well, we're going to either spoil our ballot or we're going to vote for another party. So there are options where you can register that protest. I think that it is a valid way of participating in elections as opposed to not going to the polls at all. And, you know, and many people have said, well, people should at least find a way to participate rather than excluding themselves completely. So I think that sector of the electorate will have to see how many spoiled ballots we get once the counting is done.
Yeah.
And it will reflect how, that Sadiqwe campaign has actually fared. Some people have said they will just write something across the ballot paper, clearly indicating that it's a protest vote, so that it's not mistaken with those who may have made a mistake and you're not quite sure if it's a spoiled ballot or what.
You know, Lubna, just speaking about spoiled ballots, I'm just looking at some research now. In 2009, KZN had the highest number of spoiled ballots. I think it was 47,000. 2004, I see we had 42,000. That's a lot, isn't it? Is
Absolutely.
it a big concern?
Well, absolutely. It could possibly be that people who go into the polling booth actually don't understand what they might have to do, or they might make a mistake and they feel that, they can't correct it, or whatever the case may be. So I think it reflects perhaps voter sort of literacy. When you make a mistake on the ballot paper, apparently this time round you can actually request a new ballot sheet. So you can actually cast your vote even if you have made a mistake. I think that we have improved things in terms of voter literacy, so there should be less spoiled ballots in terms of people who don't know what they're doing. But if they are spoiled ballot papers, I think it's a reflection of that Sadiqwe campaign and that attempt to indicate political protest as opposed to just a regular spoiled ballot.
Sure. Lubna, Nudveen, stand by. We'll come back to you. Now, as we mentioned, we have reporters fanned out across the province covering every bit of news that's coming out of KwaZulu-Natal. One of them is Linda Mgobozi. She joins me now from northern KwaZulu-Natal. Good afternoon to you, Linda. Can you hear me? Okay, I think we're having another problem with
Good afternoon, Blain. We are here in Nongoma. Hi, good afternoon, Blain again. We are here in Nongoma in a village called Mhambumbe. Yes, and there is a lot of excitement here. We've had the youth of different political parties and singing, a lot of excitement, something that we're not familiar with here in Nongoma. But Blain, before I talk too much, and I've got the youth of all political parties that are contesting this election, and we're going to speak to them and find out why there is so much peace in this area. Sawubona sis. Unjani?
Ngiyaphila ma unjani?
Sikhona. Yes. Ngicela ukubuza ukuthi ngenkathi la kukhankaswa kukhe kwaba khona yini ukuthi mhlawumbe kube khona ukulwisana ikakhulu kwinja.
Lapha akaze bebikho ukulwisana entsheni nakubo bonke, besibambisene kahle ngokuthula, ngokuhlonipha abaholi bethu nangabo bonke abasiphetheyo.
Siyabonga. Wena ucabanga ukuthi lokhu kuthula ekube khona ngesikhathi kukhankaswa la kungenxa yani?
Abanga ukuthi kungenxa ukuthi sikwazile ukunderstand abaholi bethu if besitshela ukuthi senze ini, ingoba okwenza ukuthi kungabikho kulo kunanokuthi yena uma kuliwa ingoba singakwazi ukunderstand ukuthi yena uma uvote iqembu uthanda leqembu ngoba kungenxa yani. Xa uthi yilokho okwenza ukuthi sikwazi ukunderstand ukuthi yena ingoba yilokho nalokho ukuthi singali.
Okay, siyabonga. Mfowethu wena uphuma ku-ANC, awungitshele ukuthi izidingo zentsha kule ndawo, angisheshisele nje yini izidingo kakhulu zentsha la?
Mina ngicabanga ukuthi idingo zentsha ezidingayo la ngakithi ukuthi ithole indawo la ingachitha khona isizungu njengezikole, njengama-ground yabo ukuze mhlambe kungagcini sekugxila kakhulu edakamizweni.
Yebo, Blain, I've just spoken to the youth here. They say during campaigning, they listen to their political leaders, and they decided they are not going to fight each other. They're not going to fight for anything, even though they don't have water, they don't have electricity in most areas. They're not going to burn tires and all. And they are also saying, and the burning issues here for the youth, there's no entertainment areas, there are no grounds. So the youth here, unfortunately, they are saying, and they find themselves indulging into drugs, which is not a good thing. But Blain, and it's very peaceful here in Nongoma. We know that this area used to be traditional IFP, but now, and since 2011, it's under the control of the NFP. But we've been around Nongoma, we've been around Ulundi. Definitely there is peace and democracy is maturing in this area. Back to you, Blain.
Yeah, Linda Mgobozi working very hard in northern KwaZulu-Natal. We'll touch base with you there a little earlier on. Now, let's try that interview again. Earlier on, I spoke to Premier Senzo Mchunu. No, it seems that we don't have him. Oh, well, we have him voting, in fact. Let's play that insert of the Premier voting. We're told that the Premier did vote at Impangeni, and he was thrilled to vote. You know, he said he fought hard, the country fought hard in terms of getting this vote, and he cast his vote at Impangeni very earlier this morning. Premier Senzo Mchunu there. Let's get back to Lubna Nadvi now. Let's talk about one of the issues that when I spoke to the Premier earlier on, he was concerned with regards to the protests that are emerging. But another concern was a hotspot in KwaMashu Hostel. Ayanda Mshlongo, our reporter, was there earlier on. She said it was relatively calm. But what's your sense in terms of KwaMashu Hostel? Did you expect it to be this current status or more volatile?
Well, I think it's not surprising. I mean, obviously there have been historical issues in that region, and certainly the local dynamics sometimes lend themselves to creating those kinds of dynamics. But I think that it seems that as if things are under control, but clearly people who are living there are not happy. So obviously the local situation will potentially get out of control if it is not managed, and therefore the authorities and the security situation has to be brought under control. But I think that KwaMashu and other regions, you know, where there have been historical sort of protests have to be watched very closely, because it reflects and signifies a bigger problem, that the region itself is something or is an area that needs greater attention in terms of ensuring that the grievances of the residents are actually addressed. Yeah. So it reflects the bigger picture. It's not only when elections happen that you see this coming up. It is something that's an ongoing issue.
But it happens now. What sort of effect do you think it'll have on the image of the elections?
Well, it's clearly going to create some kind of tension. Obviously, I think people will be possibly afraid to participate. There might be some level of intimidation and so on. So I think that also it's a question really of trying to ensure that the security is in place such that, you know, the electoral processes and other democratic processes can unfold smoothly and so that people can go and cast their vote. Yes.
Mm-hmm. What's your views on the minority front and its campaign here in KwaZulu-Natal?
Well, clearly after the passing of Mr. Rajbansi, you know, Mrs. Rajbansi, his widow, has actually managed to try and create a sense of security and stability for the party, even though there was internal contestation between her and other members of the party. I think the fact that they've decided to contest in Gauteng as well is quite interesting, because there is a fairly significant Indian population there. Their electorate base has been largely the Indian community, though they have been trying to actually campaign in other communities, saying that they try to speak to issues that concern other demographic groupings. So I think that they are expanding, but clearly they have a loyal following. So that those constituencies in Durban, for example, your Chatsworth, Phoenix, and those areas are their historical support bases. So it'll be interesting to see what support they get from Gauteng this time round in terms of their expanding into that. But I think that they are a minority party, so they will certainly not not get a large chunk of the vote.
Sure. Lubna Nadvi, our political analyst, thank you very much indeed. We'll touch base with Lubna a little later on. Our special edition broadcast from KwaZulu-Natal continues. Stay tuned to SABC News for more about this province. For now, though, it's back to Pretoria.